Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I appreciate your time. This is Missy Korn, and I'm going to introduce Shelly Ellis. She is the Deputy Superintendent of Student Support, and her team is Kelly Otis, and she is the Director of Targeted Support and Improvement. And I want to welcome both of you and thank you for doing this webinar for us.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Shelly and Kelly, and we're really happy to be with you this afternoon. And thank you, guys. I know several of you are probably getting ready to go on fall break, so we appreciate you logging in, and we hope that you have a great fall break. So we'll just jump right in and get started. The first thing we want to do is actually show you a video. Today we're talking about decreasing chronic absenteeism. And Hetty Chang is the Executive Director of Attendance Works, and much of the research that we'll talk about today and best practices come from Hetty and her group. And so this will just kind of set the stage for what we're going to talk about today.
Missing a day of school here, 2 days there may not seem like a big deal. But before long, those days add up, and students aren't learning, and they're struggling to keep up academically. 7 million children in the U.S. are considered chronically absent. That means missing 10% of the school year. States are beginning to take the problem seriously. For the last few years, schools in Cleveland, Ohio have made a big effort to encourage students to get to class every day. Special correspondent Kavitha Cardoza with our partner Education Week found steady progress there, but also a long way to go. For our weekly segment, Making the Grade.
Good morning.
It's 7 o'clock in Cleveland, Ohio, and it's dark, cold, and snowing. The kind of day when it's difficult to get out the door.
Snow is real hard.
But Amanda Watkins prides herself on her daughter's perfect school attendance.
I can't miss a day. It's my perfect attendance, not even hers.
In Cleveland Public Schools, though, that kind of attendance record is not typical. A couple of years ago, school system leaders found more than half their 40,000 students were chronically absent. The problem starts as early as kindergarten.
Oh, careful now.
Principal Brittany Anderson at Patrick Henry School greets every child as they come in.
How are you?
And their parents.
Well, we appreciate you all for making sure they're safe.
A lot of parents expressed that they didn't feel welcomed in the school in prior years.
So once a week, she sets out coffee and pastries.
And at first, it was just a way to get them in. But then the coffee clubs turned into a way for the parents to talk to the teachers. That way we can have these conversations with our parents without it feeling formal.
Diamond Godomsky has 3 kids in the school. She appreciates the warm welcome.
When, you come in and you see smiling, friendly faces with stuff to give to you, hot treats or whatever, it makes you feel good.
All right, SPO meeting tomorrow.
Anderson says building good relationships with parents makes it more likely they'll bring their children to school, even on a day like today.
If our scholars are not here, then they're not learning.
Students who miss a lot of school are more likely to drop out. Robert Balfance, a researcher with Johns Hopkins University, found a direct link between attendance and academics in Florida.
Essentially, we found that each additional day of missed schooling, students had 1 fewer point on the state test. So miss 10 days, lose 10 points, miss 15 days, lose 15 points.
But because schools used to track attendance differently, Balfan says until recently, states didn't even realize there was a problem.
Traditionally, schools have measured average daily attendance, which is how many kids on average are in the building on a given day. And except in the most extreme cases, that's almost always in the 90s. And we're hardwired to think 90A, good. But it turns out that you could have average daily attendance in the low 90s and still have a quarter of your kids missing a month or more of school.
Chronic absenteeism affects all students, says Hetty Chang with the nonprofit Attendance Works.
A teacher now is faced with the choice of repeating lessons or keeping going on for the kids who have been there. And that churn slows down the ability of the entire classroom to move forward.
A new federal education law signed into effect by former President Barack Obama goes into effect this year. Now, all states will be required to track chronic absenteeism. It's typically considered missing 18 school days or more. But Cleveland leaders found even missing 1 day a month made a difference. So they started a public relations blitz. The slogan, "Get to school, you can make it," was on billboards, posters, magnets, t-shirts, even grocery store bags. Everyone helped staff a daily phone bank. Board members, principals, bus drivers. They made 16,000 calls the first year.
The reason for the call is Jalen has missed 4 more days of school, and good attendance helps.
Keisha Bullard is a kindergarten teacher.
Is there anything that we can do to assist you? In the past hour, for instance, I think that I've dialed maybe 20 numbers, 30 numbers.
Low-income families in particular face many challenges.
With the weather being like it is asthma. Most of the time it is transportation or illness issues.
Laurie Hobson, who's in charge of attendance for the district, found lots of kids miss school simply because they don't have clean clothes.
We provide uniforms to any family who needs a uniform, and what we discovered was attendance improves for as much as 6 weeks after receiving a uniform.
Cleveland schools partner with several organizations to help provide families with everything from a bus pass to emergency shelter to legal help. This makes sense, Chang says, because a school district can't solve deeper social problems on its own.
When you have high levels of chronic absence, often it means that there are these bigger challenges, and you really need to have a community approach to address it.
In Cleveland, it's an all-out effort. A community college offers scholarships as incentive, local businesses check attendance before hiring, and the Cleveland Browns players visit schools regularly.
Whenever you're late, that means you don't have respect for the other person's time. In the NFL, you get fined. So I think our fine, if you miss a meeting, might be like $10,000.
Welcome, everyone. We have a full agenda, so I'm not going to...
Some districts do use punishments such as fines, jail time, and taking away driver's licenses. But Cleveland schools have found focusing on positive messages far more effective.
We show up every day and social Cleveland students, even when it's cold outside. Get to school, Cleveland. We know you can make it.
In the last 2 years, Cleveland's chronic absenteeism rate has dropped from 50 to 30%. At Cleveland High School for Digital Arts, Principal Jasmine Mays and a local radio celebrity are hosting a surprise celebration because students have made their attendance goal.
You never know when DJ Incognito's gonna show up and just come and throw us a party.
Ninth grade is another year when students are most likely to miss school, but today everyone is glad they're here.
That's actually the icing on the cake, Z107.9 being here.
It's cool because it brings everybody together, you know, like it's something unexpected.
I think it motivates kids to come to school because they don't want to miss cool stuff like this.
Eric Gordon is the CEO of Cleveland Schools. He says they've moved from rewarding perfect attendance to recognizing students who come to school regularly. Someone watching might say, really, a party just for coming to school? Like, isn't that what kids are supposed to do?
Well, yes, it is what kids are supposed to do. I would challenge people to look at their own workplace environments, though, where companies give bonuses for all kinds of things, including high attendance, where they have parties for their staff for performing well. I mean, incentive is part of how you create behaviors.
In Cleveland, thousands more children now attend classes regularly, but a third of the district is still missing 18 days or more of school, and Gordon says it'll continue to take a lot of effort. For PBS NewsHour and Education Week, I'm Kavita Cardoza in Cleveland, Ohio.
Well, an update to our education story from a couple of weeks ago on the teachers.
Okay, so I know that video is a little bit long, but Kelly and I really love it and love what Cleveland is doing. So either, if you don't mind, unmuting yourself or typing in the chat box if you don't have a microphone. And I don't know why this says 1-1 instead of 1-2. I'm sorry I didn't catch that. But we just kind of want to know what resonated with you in the videos, what stood out to you. And did the video spark any thoughts for potential community partnerships for your school? This is a great time for us to kind of hear from you, and it helps guide our conversation going forward. Mm-hmm.
Good.
So some things we're seeing in the chat box is that people would never have thought of clean clothes as a reason to miss school, and that some people kept a closet of clothes to trade out of uniforms, which is a great idea. I love that. Some things that kind of stood out with me was the focus on the positivity and the connection and the building of community versus the negativity and the punishment. Kelly, what always stands out to you?
You know, I think anytime that you can make kids want to be at school, and the DJ showing up sporadically is just a good example of you never know when he's going to be there, which makes kids say, you know, I don't want to miss. So they come to school in hopes he'll come that day. Did someone just say something?
Was it Patricia?
Patricia, did you say something?
Yeah, that individual contact, that's what Patricia is typing about. So yeah, all of those things make a difference. And so we feel like this, if you're looking at chronic absenteeism as a school site or as a district, that's a really great video to share to kind of turn the thinking away from the negative and the punishment to what can we actually control? Because I think a lot of times when we as educators hear chronic absenteeism, the first thing we think is, well, that's not us. That's the parents. That's the kids. We don't have any control of that. So we're going to talk about some things that you actually can have control of in this area. So when we think about chronic absenteeism, really, what is it? It's when a student misses so much school for any reason that they're academically at risk. So Attendance Works, which is where Hetty Chang is from, defines it as missing 10% or more of school for any reason. So for a lot of people think that that's 18 days, but it really depends on the length of your school year. So 18 days kind of got batted around for a while because many of our schools are on a 180-day academic calendar. But it really depends on how many days you're in session. So if you've got a student that's missing 10% or more for any reason, they're chronically absent. So it's no longer just looking at, is a student skipping or is it excused for a doctor? It's really about, is it excused? Is it unexcused? Are they suspended? It really doesn't matter. Chronic absenteeism is about the fact that they're not in the seat learning. So they're not in your classroom and they're not in your school. And we know if they're not there, they can't learn. So it's kind of shifting your thought process from, well, we know why they were gone, to it doesn't matter why they were gone. We need them here as much as possible. I think the thing that's difficult about chronic absenteeism too for schools is it's not really feasible to have 0% chronic absent, because we're human beings and kids get sick and kids have chronic illnesses. And so it's really more about who is missing, not because of a chronic illness, but because of something within their environment or our environment as a school. It's also turning your thinking from truancy to chronic absenteeism. And what does that mean? What's the difference? So in truancy, that's that we're counting just unexcused absences if a kid is skipping. We're emphasizing that individual compliance with school rules, so kind of that punishment and the legality and punitive solutions. Whereas with chronic absence, we're counting all absences. We're emphasizing the academic impact of missed days, and we're trying to use preventive problem-solving, trauma-informed strategies. And as you all know, that trauma-informed strategies in our state is huge. You know, we can assume in our state that 45% of our students have an ACE or an adverse childhood experience. and we rank #1 in the nation of students who have experienced 4 or more adverse childhood experiences. So we really have to keep those things in mind as we're setting policy and as we're thinking about the effects that this has, not just on our students, but our families as well. So I just kind of wanted, if you don't mind, kind of chatting in. When you think about your chronically absent students, what barriers do you see? There are a lot of research around different barriers, but we always want you to be thinking about, okay, what barriers do we have? Is it transportation? Is it because kids don't have a coat? Is it because they don't have gas money? At my middle school where I was principal, it was a Title I school, and I was in a suburban area, but I had a lot of students but all 4 of my feeder elementaries were Title I. I was the only one in the district, only middle school in the district that all 4 of my feeders were Title I. And a lot of my students lived out at the lake, which was a good deal away from my school. And if they missed the bus, they were not coming to school because that was their only form of transportation. So that was a barrier for my students. I had a student who lived at the lake who didn't have running water, and he was in 8th grade, and his classmates knew he didn't smell very good. That was a barrier for that student to come to school. So what we did to solve that issue was we had a family and consumer sciences classroom. So he would come in the morning and pick up clean clothes from the office and all the things he needed to shower and brush his teeth, and he would go to the gym locker room. Then he would bring his dirty clothes back and we would wash them for him. So while that was a home barrier, there were things that we could do as a school site to help him overcome that barrier. His attendance improved, his grades improved, his discipline incidences went way down. And that was truly a simple thing that we could do at our school. And yeah, so what they're saying is students who don't have a support system miss more days, absolutely. And so we think about how can we be that support system. So what can we do about chronic absenteeism? Attendance Works has a lot of great tools that you can use. And the first thing you have to do is kind of do a self-assessment. And I'm speaking from the district perspective, but I want you to know that on Attendance Works, they have all of these same tools at a school site level. So you really need to think about what is our actionable data? What are we looking at? Do we have positive engagement? Are we building capacity around this issue? Do we have a shared accountability? And who are our strategic partners? So you can see this is just a graph that shows how important all of these 5 things are with our schools and students and families right in the center of that. And so these are all the things that you can be looking at, these 5 things to help increase attendance and decrease chronic absenteeism. So what you're looking at now is a tool that you can download and print for free from Attendance Works. Everything that they have is free, and this is the self-assessment tool. And so you can gather a group of stakeholders and start going through this. The first is the actual data, and it's got those 5 questions that you're looking at. And you know, what is our strength? Is it a strength? Are we okay for now? Could we be better? Is this an urgent gap, or do we not know? And if we did rate ourselves, how do we know that? Like, what made us say this was a strength, or what made us think this was an urgent gap? So you do that around the actionable data. You do it around positive engagement. Then there's one for capacity building, shared accountability, and strategic partnership. And remember, those were those 5 things around this diagram with the schools, students, and families in the middle. But if you don't assess where you are as a district and a school, it's really difficult to decide what should we do about this if we don't know where we even are. So you can use those tools and develop a cross-functional team and participate in those following steps. So you can complete that assessment, and I just showed you those 5 things. There were only 5 questions, so it's not really lengthy. Then debrief and set goals. So what Attendance Works suggests is that group of stakeholders take that self-assessment individually prior to meeting as a group and then have conversation around that, and then determine as a team what your strengths and gaps are, and then where do the differences of opinion lie and why. And then you want to identify your practices to continue, and then just identify those areas of improvement. And understand that you can't make it happen all at once, so we can set 2 or 3 priority goals as you're making your plan. And then the really big thing is to communicate the results. So you can't have this really invested stakeholder group and then never tell the rest of your school staff. And you've got to tell your students, and you've got to tell your families, because you've got to have them engaged in the plan as well as all of your community partners. So a lot of times we talk about a multi-tiered systems of support when we're talking about students' academics and behaviors. So for those of you who are not familiar with a multi-tiered system of support, I'll kind of give you an academic example. So tier 1 is the instruction that every kid gets. So if we are doing reading instruction, it's what every kid gets at the same time. And that hits most of our students. But we'll have a small group of students who will need a little bit more attention, and those would be tier 2. So they may need some pull out in a small group to work on a skill. And then we always have a few tier students who need tier 3 intervention, which means they need some one-on-one reading instruction. And they're so they need the tier 1, and they may need to participate in tier 2 also, that small group, but then they'll need that individual one-on-one with a reading specialist. So you can use that same concept of multi-tiered systems of approach to talk about chronic absenteeism. And they just kind of invert the pyramid, and so instead of 1 being at the base, it's at the top. So you can see that tier 1 is the universal. It doesn't cost very much. It's the thing that's going to hit probably 90 to 95% of all of your students and families. So that's kids that are missing less than 5%, and they kind of start to move a little bit to being at risk at 5 to 9%. But once they hit 10 to 19%, which is moderate chronic absence, then you need to move to tier 2. And then for those students that miss 20% or more, that's when you need to have some tier 3 or those individualized supports in place. And I go back to that actionable data. Until you go through that self-assessment and really look at your data and know who your kids are, it's really hard to put this in place. So you've got to start with the data. But once you have that and you know who is struggling, then you can start with these tiered systems approach. But the first thing you have to do is put some prevention in place, and tier 1, which is the most important because it hits the 90 to 95% of your kids. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kelly so that she can start walking you through what you can do on tier 1. And eventually we'll get into tier 2 and tier 3, but we're going to start you with tier 1 today, and we're happy for you to reach out to us for tier 2 and tier 3 at a later time. No, I think it's you. Is it me? Yeah, it's all about culture. Okay, cool. So Kelly's going to talk about tier 1, what you can do for tier 1.
All right, and what we didn't say at the beginning of this webinar is that Shelly and I came from the same district, and my elementary school was one of the feeders that fed into her middle school. So we have a little bit of a history together and understand where some of you are what you face every day. And so if we look at the things that might be in our control, and what we know is we can strive for it, but the bottom line is we are never going to have 0% chronic absenteeism, but that doesn't mean we don't try. And so we have to strive for it. And so what are some of the things that we as school leaders or teachers of the classroom or anyone who works in a school, where does it fall under our responsibility? And those are the things that we're going to talk about today. So if we look at our inverted pyramid and take a closer look at tier 1, the first thing that is, can I move the chat box over off of my notes? Okay. Okay, so if we look at the inverted pyramid, we're going to take a little bit closer look at each one of those bullets. So, but if we Shelly already told you which students are part of that. So it's 5% of the kids it's pretty much their attendance is kind of satisfactory because they haven't missed that many days, but they have started to miss too many. And then the 5 to 9%, those are the ones that are at risk of falling into the tier 2 area. But what we know is that we need to look at all of those bullets. So an engaging school climate. So what I say when I present this in person is, and it's hard to see faces on this, so I'm just going to say it how I present it, and I hope nobody gets offended by it, but attitude reflects leadership. And when I say leadership, that's 2 tiers. Classroom leadership is the teacher, and building leadership is the principal. And so when I say attitude reflects leadership, what I'm saying there is, if you have a classroom that just feels icky and the kids aren't getting along and it's just nobody looks forward to coming into that room every day, then as the teacher of that classroom, you are the leader of that classroom, and you have to take a look in the mirror and do some self-reflection and ask yourself, what have I done to build community in this space? And then go a little higher than that. And if you have an icky feeling building and it just doesn't feel welcoming, the teachers aren't getting along, the kids aren't getting along, the parents aren't getting along, then as a principal, you have to look at yourself in the mirror and do some self-reflections and ask, what have I done to build community with all of my stakeholders? And so looking at the next bullet, positive relationships with students and families. And I wrote in my notes there that we're talking about more than just a family fun night. So family fun nights are awesome and amazing, and I wouldn't say to anybody don't have them, because that is a piece of building community with your families, but it's not what builds capacity in your families and helps them understand how to help their students with their learning. And so you have to have engaging families in understanding what their children are learning. So in order to do that, we have to have sit down communication with our families and change the conversation. Change the conversation from, hey, come up to the school, enjoy our family fun night, which is great and good, and and we have the book fair going, that's awesome. But change the conversation to say, please come to the school and talk to us about your child's learning, and here's what you can do at home. Our family guides that we provide on the State Department's website is a great starting point for that. And then the next bullet is impact of absences on achievement is widely understood that, if the kid isn't there, then the learning doesn't happen. And that doesn't matter if it's an excused absence or an unexcused absence. If they're not there, they're not learning. But it's more than that. It's not just the students' absences. It's also talking about our teachers' attendance. And that's a hard one to balance as a building leader. I know I was a building leader just a couple of years ago, and it's hard because you don't want to burn your teachers out, and they have the days to use, but some have saved up days for many, many years and could quite honestly take as many as they want and never run out. But helping teachers understand that when they're not there, their students' achievement is going to have gaps, and when they're not there, students don't want to be there either, because many of our students, especially our trauma students, just have bad luck with every substitute we put in the classroom. So a teacher's regular attendance is just as important as our students' regular attendance. And then looking on to the next bullet is good and improved attendance, recognized, not just perfect attendance. And that was always one as a building leader that I struggled with, because everybody wanted their kids on the perfect attendance list, and when they saw their child wasn't going to be on it because of a doctor's appointments, well, but I brought a note. Well, if you just focus your attention more on good and improved attendance rather than perfect attendance, we're not leaving a whole bunch of kids out of that conversation. And so that kind of takes the pressure off as well. And then the last bullet on this is common barriers identified and addressed. And Shelly did a really nice job. Her barrier at her middle school is one of my favorite barriers to talk about. It just brings tears to my eyes to think about that student getting to have clean clothes and getting to stay in his classroom and not be made fun of by his friends and classmates. So that's a little bit closer look at the tier 1. And then go on to the next slide. So basically the bottom line for leaders, and this one really touches home for anybody that is a building leader or even a district level leader. Bottom line for leaders is that if they do not become conscious of the cultures in which they are embedded, those cultures will manage them. And so one of the things that I always kept in my mind as things happened around me, and if I didn't address something that just wasn't okay with me, then the thing that I would repeat to myself is what you permit, you promote. And so your silence sometimes sends the message that it's okay. It's okay that that teacher talked in a not so nurturing way to a student. If you overheard it and you weren't okay with it and you are silent about it, it sends the message to the teacher that that's okay. So what you permit, you promote. And then moving on to the next, it's just research is clear that schools and districts can impact students' absenteeism. And one of the things that I like to read at this point is a little poem. You've probably heard it before, but I combine this into one instead of reading it twice just to save us some time. But basically it's as a teacher / leader, so that's as a teacher or a principal, I possess tremendous power to make a child or teacher's life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or humor, hurt or heal. In all cases, it is my response that decides whether a situation is escalated or de-escalated, a child or teacher humanized or dehumanized. And so that's really hard sometimes for us to just really have to hold ourselves accountable to the fact that if we have an icky feeling classroom or an icky feeling school, and yes, I'm an elementary person, so I'm going to say icky, but if we have a classroom or a school building that just feels icky, then we, the educators, are 100% responsible for that. And we can fix that. So the example that I always like to talk about is if you have a student that at home, their social and emotional needs are not being met, and they come to school and their social and emotional needs are not being met there either, and their parent looks at them that morning and says, you want to go to school? Given the two choices, go to school and I have to do some work, or I can stay home and play on the television and nobody bothers me. Either way, they're not getting the social and emotional needs met. They're going to choose to stay home. But kids need social and emotional needs met. And so if we do our job at school and meet those needs, even when a parent gives a child the choice of go to school or stay home, they're going to choose to come to school if those needs are being met. And so that's our responsibility to hold ourselves and everyone we work with responsible to do that. And so, did we want to go over the reflection? We have time, I believe. So anyway, I'm going to step aside and let Shelly take over. Sorry, I got on my little soapbox for a few minutes, but I'm very passionate about it, about us holding each other responsible for the environment of our classrooms and our buildings.
Well, I think I would go back to that actionable data piece and ask Kelly to share a story from when she was a principal, because I worked with the middle school kids, she worked with the littles. And so even your youngest students can understand data and track their own data. Do you mind sharing that story?
Not at all. So at my buildings, I asked my teachers to have all of their students have student data notebooks. And I required that even at the pre-K level. And I remember a pre-K teacher looking up at me in the meeting where I was saying I wanted everyone to have one. And she's like, but they're so little. And I said, I know, but trust me. So she came up with a great system. And all that I asked that pre-K kiddos tracked were their attendance and their behavior. So if they were there on time and they stayed all day, they got a green sticker. If they were tardy, they got a yellow sticker. If they were absent, they got a red sticker. And if they left early for any reason, they had to replace their green sticker with a blue sticker. And one Friday, this little guy gets called up to the office. I just happened to be in the office at the time. And he comes up with his teacher and he's just stomping in the office with his little cowboy boots. And he looks up at his mom and he says, I don't like blue stickers. And she's like, I don't understand what he's saying. And I said, oh, well, let me explain it to you. So I explained how they track their attendance. And she's like, oh my goodness, I pick him up early on Fridays just because I think it's a treat. I will never pick him up early again. And so that solved his problem. But that's just an example of how even a pre-K student can put pressure on their parents to get them to school and leave them at school when they know that it matters. And even though we don't track chronic absenteeism with our pre-K students, that's when good and bad habits are formed. And so we have to encourage consistent daily attendance, even with our youngest learners, because that's where they're going to learn, is school important enough to go every day?
Thanks, Kelly. So as you can see, and as you all know, because you're living it right now, it's not a quick problem to solve. It takes multiple steps and it takes a lot of buy-in. And I think the first piece is admitting that there are some things that you could do within your own school, your own district, your own community to help positively impact attendance. So kind of just thinking about what you saw in the video and what we talked about today. What do you think would work in your district or school? Or after this conversation, what would or could you do differently? We're always want to hear from you guys and suggestions that you have to help us do better around this presentation. I will say that on Attendance Works, sorry. Oh, there it is. On Attendance Works, we have a lot of things on our State Department of Education website, but on Attendance Works, you can, like I said, you can download all their self-assessments. It also has directions that go with it, so you can download the instructions. They have larger print ones if you want to put things around the wall, and rather than have dialogue, you can have people do like the gallery walk where they each get a pad of sticky notes and they could just answer the question on sticky notes and put it on each question and then come back and have the conversation. Sometimes these are difficult conversations to have. And so there are ways in which you can start this conversation and help move forward for kiddos. But I know all of you, especially in alternative education, you all just go above and beyond to help your students. And we know you're working with our most vulnerable, most at-risk population, and supplying them with food and clothes and all kinds of things are not new things to you all. But I think it helps to think about what are those environmental barriers that we have going on and how can we address those. One school system this summer told Kelly and I, as we were at Engage OK on the road, that they had gotten some gas cards donated from a local quick trip or something like that. And so randomly, never the same day and never, where parents could predict it. They just, whoever was on duty out in the car line would have gas cards, and when they brought their kids to school on time, they were like, hey, thanks for being here on time, here's a gas card. And so parents started to talk about those things and understand, hey, it's important to get here, it's important to get here on time. And then that can just develop into good habits. And I had the same thing where I had a family who's single mom and needed gas money, and we were able to procure some gas cards for her. And that just goes a long way with your families, and it really opened up the dialogue between us as a school. Her kids improved. She became one of our biggest supporters. So I'm really nerdy, and I like the movie Sky High, the Disney movie, and it was on last night. And so I watched it, and the main character talks about, my arch enemy became my best friend became my girlfriend, and my girlfriend became my arch enemy. And so I kind of think about that sometimes in schools. Sometimes our hardest constituents can become your loudest supporters and your best friends if you're meeting the needs that they have. And so if you guys have any questions, we're happy to answer those. Other than that, if you're getting ready to go on fall break, I hope it's lovely, and I hope that you won't work, and I hope that you will do a lot of self-care. And we appreciate you joining in. And thanks for all that you do every single day for the students of Oklahoma.